What is your role with the Scottish FA?
So that's a great question to start. So I've got two different bits to my job. The first is that I'm the doctor for the men's A squad. So when the team get together, such as before the World Cup qualifiers or for the Euros, then I go and look after the players. And the second part is working with the Scottish FA in general. So in the last year, that's really been helping to look at COVID within Scottish football and write the protocols about how we look after our players and fans and spectators, and also anything else that occurs within sport. So things like anti-doping to try and ensure that players are aware of not taking any drugs, and things like cardiac screening so we can ensure that their hearts are working normally and healthy.
How long have you been involved with the Scottish FA?
So a long time, I'm afraid, almost 38 years, I think, now. I started when I was very young. I was really lucky. My brother played professional football, so I used to go and watch him when I was your age, and then started playing football myself and realised that I was never going to make it as a player, and that instead of being in my feet, all my brains were in my head. So I qualified as a doctor and then met the person who was a Scottish team doctor working in hospital, and he got me involved with the youth teams. And then gradually I moved up to the under-21s, and for the last 25 years I've been one of the doctors with the men's A team.
How long did you have to study to be a doctor?
So you spend 5 years at university, but before that obviously you've got to work really hard at school in order to get hires to get into university. And then once you qualify as a doctor, you work for 2 years as a very junior doctor, trying to start off your training. And then after that, you go into specialise in whatever area you want to work in. So that might be in heart medicine, that might be as a GP or as a surgeon. And then usually you'll spend another sort of 5 to 8 years training before you get to be a fully qualified GP or a fully qualified consultant.
What's your favourite stadiums you've ever visited?
Oh, that's a great question too. So I've been really lucky in the last 25 years or so that I've done a lot of travelling with football. So I've been lucky enough to go to South America. So for example, the Aztec Stadium in Mexico, which was once the largest stadium in the world. I've also managed to travel to the Far East, so places like Japan and Hong Kong with football. And around Europe, some fantastic stadia around Europe. So the San Siro in Milan was one of my favourites. And it's always good going to Wembley, particularly if we can beat England at Wembley. And to be honest, the stadium I like the best is this one here, which, as you might or might know, was once the biggest stadium in the world and had the largest crowd ever at a football match, nearly 150,000 people. It's a lot less than that now, but when Scotland are playing, particularly playing well, it's a fantastic atmosphere. So Hampden's probably my favourite stadium of all.
What advice would you give to players of all ages?
So if we're looking at to be the best that you can be as a footballer, there's a couple of things I would say. Some of the lifestyle things that you do are really important. So I know it sounds a wee bit strange to say, but eating a healthy diet is important. Drinking lots of fluids is important. Getting enough sleep is really important. And then if we look at football, it's being involved with a good club where the coaches are well qualified and will look after you. And it's not just about technique as a footballer, but it's about fitness as well. And if we're looking to prevent injuries, then making sure you do a good warm-up at the start of every session and maybe even a cool down at the end of session. And if you're injured, it's really important to let someone in the club know, so the physiotherapist or whoever's looking after the injuries, earlier rather than late, and they can help you to recover and rehab from that injury and get you back playing. So don't play through injuries. Let injuries be a warning for you, and always tell the club physiotherapist so you can get help to get back on to doing what you do best, and that's play football.
What is the hardest injury that you've had to treat?
So the hardest injuries are probably the ones that threaten a player's career. So injury is pretty common in sport, in contact sports like football and rugby and things like that. So knee injuries and ankle injuries and things like that are pretty common. So the hardest ones would be the ones where players have perhaps had a really bad broken leg, or they've torn their cruciate ligament that you've probably heard of. And that's an injury that will keep a player out from 6 to 8 months. And for some players, it might be the end of their career. So these are the hardest ones when it affects the player's ability to get back to playing and do what he or she loves to do and that's playing football.
What advice do we have for children for heading footballs?
So I'm guessing you're asking this question because there's been a lot of publicity around over the last year or so. And I'm really proud to have been part of the research team, both here at Hampden and at University of Glasgow, that produced one of the really big studies that showed that footballers who've retired, unfortunately, have a higher incidence of dementia in later life. So what we then do is we try and look at ways that that dementia might be caused, and head injury and heading are two of the areas that have been identified. So what we did a year or so back is in Scottish football, we were the second only country in the world to put in guidelines in young players for heading. So for people of your age at primary school, there's no heading training, and we leave heading training until you're older, and we can do it in a much more controlled manner. And we try and limit the number of headers in training. And the other thing about football at your age is that heading during matches is not that common. Most of the time you're encouraged to play football with the ball on the ground and the ball's not in the air as much. So there's very little heading takes place in matches. So we're pretty comfortable that if we exclude heading in training for people in primary school, then that won't be to the detriment of the game. And then what we can do is educate our coaches in the best way to practice heading so that by the time you guys get to play in the adult game, we can make it as safe as possible. And just in the last couple of weeks, there's been another study following on from our original one, and we'll look again at what the guidelines are now for adults and see if we can reduce the overall number of headers, particularly in training. And the real aim of that is to keep everyone as safe as possible in football.
With the recent Christian Eriksen situation, do you think it's important for every football match to have a medical team at the game?
Yeah, I think it was a tragic situation which has had a good outcome. So what happened with Christian Eriksen is he had an issue with his heart that caused his heart not to work properly on the pitch. And if you remember, if you saw it on the television, you'll realise he just collapsed suddenly. But the good thing about that was that the medical team were at the side of the pitch and could get onto the pitch really quickly and successfully restarted his heart. So I think that's one brilliant example of how important it is to have medical people at the side of the pitch and also to have the right equipment. And in Scotland, we're really well organised and really proud of our medical training. So we have a national sports first aid course that we run from Hampden, which is really designed for coaches at every level in the game to have some basic first aid training. And that includes how to do heart massage and how to do defibrillation. And then for the doctors and physios, we've got a really good advanced pitch care course, which teaches them not just things like cardiac arrest, but how to manage traumatic injuries like fractures, etc. And interestingly, our course in Scotland's been adopted by UEFA, and we now teach that course for UEFA all around Europe. So it's really a testimony to the education programme that the Scottish FA has got in place for coaches and doctors and physiotherapists.
What type of equipment do we require at a match day?
So we've got in front of us here the equipment that we would have just here because we're sitting in the dugouts at the side of Hampden. So this is the equipment that we'd have for use on the pitch. And remember, as well as our medical team, we've got first aiders and we've got paramedics and an ambulance. So the cover for football is really good. So if we start and look at this is our emergency pitch side bag. And this is a great bag because it means that everything that we need on the pitch is in here. Now, all the equipment in here are things for serious injury or for serious illness. So this is the type of equipment that would have come on the pitch for Christian Eriksen's situation. At the same time, we've got oxygen, and one of the most important things is a defibrillator. So you probably have heard of defibrillators, and basically they're a machine that can restart someone's heart or rechange the rhythm of someone's heart. And they're really very easy to work, and we teach this on our first aid course and our advanced pitch care course, and it's really important that as many lay people know how to use a defibrillator as possible, because that can make the difference between life and death. So this is the type of machine that the doctors would have put on the chest of Christian Eriksen, press the button, and that gives his heart an electric shock and restarts the rhythm of his heart. So everything in here is emergency equipment, from oxygen to tubes for putting in to help people breathing, to drugs and medicines, and it goes along with the oxygen and the defibrillator. And the other part of the equipment that we've got is for other traumatic type injuries. So for example, this is a splint that we can use if someone has a fractured leg. We can protect the leg with the splint, put the straps over and put it tight, and that then supports the leg when they're being carried off the pitch. Okay. This is a collar, so we would use this collar if we suspect that someone's had a neck injury. So the big bad injuries that we don't like in football are injuries to head and neck, so people being knocked unconscious or having a concussion, or somebody who's suspected of having a neck injury. And what the collar does when we put the collar on is it protects the neck and holds the neck really still. And you've probably seen on the television people using their hands to hold people's necks still in football and in sport, and then they pop on one of these collars to keep it still and stop it from moving and stop it from doing any further damage. And the other thing we've got here is two pieces of equipment that can help to get players off the pitch. So this one is called a scoop stretcher, and the beauty of the scoop stretcher is it comes apart. So it comes apart into two pieces, and we can use the scoop stretcher, and what we can do is we can slide this part in on one side of the player when he or she's coming off the pitch, and then from the other side slide that in. Then we hook the ends together, clip them back together, and then it's very easy to lift the player back up. Now you'll notice when players are getting carried off the pitch, there's often 3 or 4 people doing that round about it. And we like to use this. It looks a bit like a canoe. It's a basket stretcher, and the beauty of the basket stretcher is that you can lift the scoop up. Do you want to help me and lift it up? So grab the end there, and you come to the other end. And then what you're going to do is you're going to walk round and you're going to lay the stretcher into the basket. We would move the equipment out the road and then put that down. That's you. And you can see how neatly that fit in and how safe it is then to lift the basket up. It makes it much more solid, and you're much less likely to drop the player when you come off the pitch, which is never a good thing to do.